Hi everyone, today we welcome you to this edition of our Angular series tutorial. Today we will be covering three things. Number one, data binding. Number two, forms and form validation. So last day in our tutorial, we had actually covered a little bit of data binding. There we actually bounded a property called title into our view. There whatever the value of the property title was, it was displayed in the in the view. You could see that in the HTML. We will go a bit more today and we'll cover the different ways you can bind the data to your view and back from view to your property. So whatever data that you will be there in the view, it can be again be bounded back to the property in your code, and from code back to the view. So we will be cover last time we actually covered one way data binding from your code to the view. Today we will be covering the reverse one, from the view back to the code, and two-way data binding. And besides that, we will also be covering forms and form validation. So before we go into the code, I will just show you the final output result. You will be seeing this. You will be seeing this final result. So this is the, we will have some arrays we will be displaying over here, then we will have a form, we will be submitting this, and we will see the result. So let's look into the changes that we have made to the last code that we did. So first of all, what we have done here is created a new directory called models underscore models. So last time we actually created an employee component. So as I said earlier, we will create an employee class or employee object. We'll create an employee model over here. So for that, we have created a directory called underscore models. Actually, this is the pattern you should be following, so that all your models should go inside a directory structure like this. So here you can see it has created a directory called models, and we have created, then we have issued a command called ng the angular, then g for generate, then class. It actually generated a class inside this models directory with employee. So this is the employee.ts file, and here you can see that we have two properties, id and name property. Employee will have two properties, the id of the employee, employee id, and the employee name. Then it has a constructor where the constructor takes in the values of this id and name and assign this to this value. So this is a very simple class you can see over here. Now let's take a look at the angular dot employee dot component dot ts. Before that, we have actually modified this heading title property that we had earlier. This was the we have, just a second, title property. Yeah, app.component. We have modified this title property over here, and it got reflected in that UI view. So I will close this down, and now let's take a look at the employee.component.ts file. So what we have now, our last time we didn't have anything. So first of all, you will see that constructor and the ng on init. So this is actually, these are actually lifecycle hooks of Angular components. We are not covering of the lifecycle hooks. If you want, you can tell me. I'll be covering it in a latest tutorial. So first of all, you can see there is a new property, new variable, emps. What is emps? Emps is now a type of an array. What type of array? Employee array. Emps will contain an employee array. So these two things, don't take a look at it. We'll be covering it later part of this tutorial. So forget these two things for now. So what we are doing, first of all, we are assigning this emps array with 5 employee objects with this values. So we have 5 employees with name Andrew, Johnny, Steve, Maria, and Tracy. With this 5 employee IDs, we are assigning this to this emps array. So now what we are doing, we will be displaying all these employee values in our view. You have already seen that we are displaying this value. Now how we will actually display this value? So let's come over here. So don't mistake this as an HTML. So you can see that extension of this file is .html. Don't mistake these as an HTML, normal HTMLs. You can see there are a lot of differences between normal HTML and over here in Angular. This is actually a template, Angular template, which will be used by Angular, processed, and then it will be processed into the views, and you will finally see the final view on your screen. So the first change that you will see, this is form, will be covering later part. So see this portion for now. So what we have, I've created a div. Inside the div, see this line very clearly. I've created a table over here. Table will have rows and columns. So what does this table contains now? What it will be showing? So you can see it has, this is called ng for Angular directive, Angular's for directive. So what it will do, it is creating a temporary variable emp of emps, means it will actually loop over that emp arrays that we have created. It will loop over there and create each row for each of the entries in the emp arrays, and will assign values of the employee id to a column and employee name to another column. So for each employee it will create one row and one column for each of the properties of the employee id and employee name, and this is the ng for directive, so that you can loop over a list of employees. So you can see the result over here. It has looked over all the employees that we have, and it is displaying the each in each row each of the employees with their employee id and the employee name. So you can see this way we have actually covered first thing the directive, Angular's directive, and then the data binding. So what kind of data binding here we are having over here? One way data binding. You cannot, we are just binding the data from our code of this, from this TypeScript to this view. You cannot map this data back to the TypeScript. So whatever data we had over here, we are displaying directly over here. So this is one way of data binding. So next, before we go to the other way of one-way data binding, that is from view back to the code, we'll have to get into the forms. So for in order to work with forms, first thing you will have to do is include these two modules. So what are the two modules? This is the forms module and this is the reactive forms module. These are the two different types of forms that you can actually use. I'm not going into the details of the differences between the forms module and reactive forms module. We can cover it later part, or you can just look up and check for the differences. If you want, I may also cover it. Okay, then I will cover it on my blog post, difference between this forms and reactive forms module in details. I want to keep this video short, so let's take a look. I've created a form over here just as we do it in HTML. Then you can see here is something called ng submit, and see the difference. We have parenthesis over here. What does this parenthesis means? This parenthesis will actually mean that this is actually binding from the view back to the code. This was from code to the view. For code to the view, you have one-way data binding, you have double curly braces. And from view back to the code, you have parenthesis. And this type of mapping is only done for the events. This is an event, click event. For the form, when you submit this form on the submit button, this event will actually be called. Means this function that we have written down, this function will be called. So let's take a look at what we have done. And you can see there is something called form group. Form group, the name of the form group that we have actually written in our code, the name is form. You can see there is something called name. Name is a property that we are using for two-way data binding from code to the view and from view back to the code. That will be this name value will be stored, the whatever we will type in here will go into the name value, and again our code will process this and change it to uppercase, and then it will be again displayed in this text box as a view. So it will be actually a two-way data binding from here back to the code with normal way, and code will process it and change into uppercase and will display over it here as a two-way data binding. So here we have form group and this property. So for form group to work, we have used injection, dependency injection form builder. So for form builder, what we have done, form builder dot group, and then here we are actually doing validation. So what validation we are doing here? In normal JavaScript or HTML, we generally write required. So how it will actually advantage? So here you can see we have given here required. We just give it over here and leave it. So in case of normal HTML, here you can actually given here only one type of validation. This is validators that required. You can give many type of validators. Suppose I will just show you, there can be length validators. You can see there is so many length, different things. You can have max length, mean, lot of things that are already predefined. You can also create your own validators and can assign this to here. We can cover the creating our own validators in a later part of our in a later tutorial, in another tutorial. So what we are doing over here, giving the group name, form control name. We have all forms as controls. Suppose this text box, this input box will have a control name. So what will this control name have? Name, it will be name, and we won't allow any null property, so it's validators dot required. So next, let us take a look at the submit function. So what we are doing, as soon as we click on the button, it will print on the console that we have clicked the button. Now if the form is valid, means if we have input, all the inputs has been valid, then what it will do, it will take the name value and then change it to uppercase, and will it will take the name value, convert into uppercase and assign it to the value back. So how it is working over here, you can see this particular line. Input type is text, then form control name. This name is used using form group to validate. Then this required normal HTML. Then this thing, you can see this is a two-way data binding. So how we are doing two-way data binding? First bracket, the third bracket that we call in mathematics. Then inside there we have a parenthesis. Inside parenthesis we write ng model. So when we write here ng model equal to name, what Angular will do, it will look for a property in our TypeScript, this code. In TypeScript it will look for a just a sec, yeah, it will, okay, close down. It will look for a code, it will look for a property with name equal to that what we have mentioned over here. So here we have mentioned ng model equal to name. So Angular will look for a property called name. Since we have a property called name, so whatever we will enter in our input box will go into this, into that property's value. So whatever input we give, it will go into this property with the name, this property value. So as then we have this submit button. The here that's this is how you write the button, then type submit, then the value over here, and that's done, form. So we have created our form. Then as soon as you submit, that value will be mapped to this property, name property. Then submit, this function will be called event. On submit event, this function will be called, then you will see this, and then the final result. So I hope I have covered everything in our code. So now let's take a look what is going on. This one I have already covered. Now let's take a look at how form is working. I'll just open up the browser console. Okay, now let's take a look at, since we have added validators, now first let's submit. You can see it has clicked. We have clicked it, but nothing has happened actually. Actually, I could have written an else for that. Okay, we'll be doing it. Okay, one thing I will be covering, ng if, it will be good. Suppose if we, since we have not entered any valid values here, our form is not valid, so it will give some, write something that this is required or something. We'll do that. So let's take a look at how it will work. Let's write here bill. Now submit it. Now it has been converted into uppercase. You can see, due to two-way data binding, which you cannot do using jQuery or something like that. You have to use that dollar hash and then do that, a lot of steps. You cannot do that kind of binding. So as soon as I clicked on given anything, suppose I write something junk values over here, and as soon as I click on submit, it will be converted into uh, uppercase, and it will be automatically assigned over here. In order to do it is using jQuery, you will have to fetch this value into a variable, then change it into uppercase, and again assign that value to this text boxes using that id or class, whatever you dollar hash or dollar dot, doing that. So it's a lot of work. You can do this using a single line. This is the beauty of two-way data binding. So let's add one more thing. I'll be adding one more thing. Let me, yeah, do one thing. Add another more property called submitted. Keep it boolean. Here we will make it as false. So whenever our component will be initialized, this submitted will be false, and as soon as it will be called, code will be called, form is submitted, it will be turned into true. It will be handy. I will show you how it will be handy. Now let's come over here and write, add a span tag. Span. So now let's add the if directive. Ng if. Now we will do submitted. Only if the form is submitted, then only it will be executed, this portion of the code. And not will write form dot controls. Our control name was name, so we'll write that dot valid. Star required. So we have written this. So how it will work, as soon as we submit, if the form is submitted and the input is not valid, then it will show this as required, because this is a required field, and the form is not valid for not giving any input, it will show up. So I hope the server has been, code has been, yeah, I hope so. Yeah, it's compiling the code. Let's give it a bit of time. So it's done. It should be refreshed. So it has got refreshed. Now you can see over here, if I click on submit, it has come required. Now if I start typing something, this will vanish. This is the beauty. Now the reason I added submitted, I will show you. Let me remove this out. And let's recompile it again. So you can see even before we have submitted, we have not yet clicked on the submit button, but it is showing star required. So we don't need something, maybe for required we may need this, but not for every time. Suppose maximum length or minimum length, in case of those things, we don't need those stuffs. So for those cases, so as soon as I type writing, it will go. So that's why I added that submitted. So when only you submit the button for the first time, then only it will be triggered, and that submitted button, submitted property will return to true, and then it will be showing up, not for the first time. So with this, we come to the end of this data binding, forms and form validation. We may cover the form validation much more, how to create more means custom form validations, and some how to add more validations. We can add that to our next tutorial. So till then, goodbye, happy coding. If you love my teaching, subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to like or comment or share. And if you have any queries, comment. You can post to my Facebook page. I will also be covering this tutorial on my blog. Till then, goodbye and happy coding.